Hello everyone and welcome to my B&B Fan Club channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In the heart of Los Angeles, where the sparkle of Hollywood Boulevard faded into the gentler, tree-lined lanes of residential districts, Deke lived a life torn between ambition and sorrow. He was a man of stark contrasts. Seductive yet secretive, determined but tormented. His days were spent negotiating the ruthless world of daytime television, where he worked as a producer on The Bold and the Beautiful, a soap opera known for its drama both on and off screen. But Deke's main problems were not with the screenplays he authorized or the casting judgments he made. They were involved in his internal conflict, which was rushing into a clash with Electra, a rising star whose presence on set was both magnetic and disruptive. Deke had always been a man who valued control. Growing up in a modest, run-down apartment in the valley, he'd learned early on that life was cruel to those who didn't take advantage of it. His mother, a single parent who worked double shifts at a diner, instilled in him both a strong work ethic and a genuine fear of failure. Deke had worked his way up through the entertainment industry, beginning as a production assistant and progressing to a position where he could create storylines and affect careers. However, he discovered that success was a fragile thing that might be undone by a single blunder. Electra was that mistake, or so he feared. She had arrived on the set of The Bold and the Beautiful 6 months earlier as a rookie with a heart-stopping face and talent that demanded attention. Her character, Isabella, was conceived as a femme fatale, a lady whose beauty concealed a lethal ambition. But Electra brought something more to the role, a raw vulnerability that made her scenes electrifying. Each gaze a story in and of itself. The audience adored her, the ratings skyrocketed, and Deke, who had initially supported her casting, was both enthralled and disturbed by her appearance. The trouble began quietly, like a fissure in a foundation that goes unseen until the walls begin to collapse. Deke had always taken pride in his professional demeanor, keeping his personal feelings separate from his business. But Electra was different. She had a way of getting past his defenses. Her laughter in the break room stayed with him long after he left the studio. He told himself it was nothing but the natural attraction of working closely with someone so gifted. But late at night, alone in his sleek, minimalist apartment, he couldn't stop thinking about her dark eyes and the way her voice softened as she told him about her dreams. Will, Deke's best buddy and a writer for the show, observed the difference in him. Will was the polar opposite of Deke in many ways. He was easygoing, quick to laugh, and unconcerned about controlling everything. He'd been with the show for years, creating the complicated love tales and betrayals that kept audiences interested. But he'd also been Deke's confidant since their college days, the only one who could see beyond Deke's polished appearance to the agony beneath. "You're losing it, man," Will observed one evening while drinking beers at a dingy bar near the studio. The neon lights outside cast a red glow across their table, as the jukebox played a somber country song. "You've got that look, like you're about to do something stupid." Deke took a long swallow of his beer, avoiding Will's stare. "I'm fine," he responded, but the words were hollow even for him. "It is Electra, right?" Will pressed and leaned forward. "You're falling for her, and it's messing with your head." Deke's jaw tightened. He wanted to deny it and laugh it off, as he often did when Will got too close to the truth. But the weight of his emotions was too enormous to ignore. "She's complicated," he finally admitted. "She isn't just an actress. There is something about her, Will. Something I can't figure out." Will leaned back, shaking his head. "You are playing with fire. Deke, she's a star. She isn't yours to figure out. And if you cross that line, it's not just your work, but your entire career." Deke knew Will was correct. The entertainment sector was small, and tales traveled like wildfire. A producer's involvement with an actress, particularly one as well known as Electra, was a recipe for disaster. But understanding the risk didn't remove the agony in his chest when he saw her on set, delivering lines with such passion that he forgot about the cameras, the crew, and the artificiality of it all. As the weeks went, Deke's internal conflict grew more intense. He attempted to keep his distance, focusing on budgets and schedules, but Electra seems to seek him out. She'd linger after rehearsals, asking for his thoughts on her character's story or telling stories about her life before Hollywood, which sounded just as lonely as his. She told him she grew up in a tiny town, reared by a grandmother who believed in her aspirations even when others didn't. When she talked about it, she had a melancholy tone in her voice, a longing for something she couldn't identify, which echoed Deke's own latent wants. They found themselves alone in the studio one night after a particularly long day of shooting. The set was dark, with the props and costumes abandoned until the next day's call time. Electra sat on the stage's edge, her screenplay in her lap and her hair hanging loosely around her shoulders. Deke had planned to depart hours ago, but he waited, telling himself he was analyzing footage when in reality, he was waiting for this moment. "You're still here," she replied, glancing up as he approached. Her grin was delicate and even bashful, in stark contrast to the forceful assurance she displayed on screen. "So are you," he responded, pausing a few steps away. He stuffed his hands in his pockets, attempting to make the situation professional, but his heart raced. "I couldn't sleep," she confessed before closing her script. "Sometimes I come here when it is peaceful. It helps me think about what?" he inquired, despite his better judgment. She paused, her attention shifting to the vacant seats in the studio audience. "About whether any of this is real," she added gently. "Fame, lights, and applause, it's all so transitory. Sometimes I wonder if I'm seeking something that doesn't even exist." Her comments landed like a punch in Deke. He'd spent years seeking the same thing: success, recognition, a sense of purpose, only to discover that it left him even more empty than before. He wanted to tell her this, to share the weight of his own disillusionment, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he took a step closer, close enough to see the faint freckles on her nose and the way her eyes shone in the dim light. "Electra," he said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment the world seemed to halt. The air between them was electric, full of unspoken possibilities. He might have stretched out and filled the gap between them, but the weight of Will's warning, and his own fears, kept him back. "I should go," he murmured hurriedly, turning away before he could reconsider. "Deke!" she yelled after him, her voice quiet yet forceful. He paused with his back to her, his heart hammering. "Don't shut me out." He didn't turn around. He could not. If he did, he knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't reverse. So he went away, the sound of her voice lingering in his head, a reminder of everything he desired and stood to lose. The next day, Deke immersed himself in his job, seeking to block out the recollection of that night. But the conflict within him was no longer solely about Electra. It was about who he was and who he was going to become. To shield himself from harm, he had spent his life creating walls and keeping people at a distance. But Electra had slid past those walls, leaving him with a choice. Let her in, risking everything, or push her away, keeping the life he'd fought so hard to create. Will realize the toll it was taking on him. "You're not yourself," he told Deke one afternoon, cornering him in his office. "You are distracted and are snapping at everyone. What's happening?" Deke scratched his temples, the weight of his sleepless nights pressing against him. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to be around her without losing control." "Then you need to make a choice," Will remarked, his tone stern but not harsh. "Either you go for it regardless of the repercussions or you let her go. But you can't keep tormenting yourself like this." Deke wanted to choose, but the prospect of failure, of destroying his job, of hurting Electra, of revealing the aspects of himself he'd kept hidden for so long, paralyzed him. So he did what he always did. He buried himself in work, expecting that the turmoil in his emotions would ultimately subside. But the turmoil only intensified. Electra's star continued to increase, with her image appearing on magazine covers, and her name trending on social media. The more successful she became, the more Deke sensed her sliding away, not because she was retreating, but because he was. He avoided her on set, keeping their talks brief and professional, but every time he saw her, the agony in his chest intensified. One evening, as the actors and crew finished a late shot, Electra approached him. Her expression was different this time. Less open, more guarded. "You're avoiding me," she remarked, her voice firm but full of hurt. Deke's stomach twisted. "I'm just busy," he claimed, but even he found the words weak. "Don't do that," she replied, moving closer. "Don't pretend it's nothing." I know you feel it too. He wanted to deny it, push her away forever, but the truth was too heavy to ignore. Electra, this can't happen, he replied, his voice breaking. It is too hazardous. For both of us. Dangerous, she said, her eyes filled with rage and anguish. What's dangerous is leading a life in which you're too terrified to feel anything. I thought you were different, Deke. I thought you noticed me. I see you, he murmured, his words tumbling out before he could control them. That is the problem. I see you, and it's tearing me apart. For a minute they stood apart, both physically and emotionally. Then Electra turned and walked away, leaving Deke alone with the weight of his decisions. The days that followed were a haze of sorrow and self-criticism. Deke pushed himself into his profession, but the delight he previously found in creating stories had vanished. Without Electra's laughing, the stage felt empty, and he couldn't fill the vacuum she left. He heard through the grapevine that she had been offered a role in a major film, allowing her to leave the bold and the beautiful behind. He knew he should be glad for her, but all he could feel was grief. Will attempted to pull him out of his downward spiral, but even his friend's optimism proved ineffective. You're letting her go without a fight, Will remarked one night, frustrated. You're so afraid of losing that you're not even trying to win. But Deke was too far gone to hear him. The struggle within him had taken its toll, leaving him hollowed out, with all he'd ever worked for but nothing truly meaningful. He watched from afar as Electra's star climbed, her name becoming synonymous with prosperity, while he clung to a life that seemed increasingly pointless. Months later, as Electra's final episode aired, Deke sat alone in his flat, the screen casting a flickering light across the room. Her character, Isabella, delivered a devastating monologue as a farewell to the love she could never have. Deke stared, his throat tight, aware that the words were more than just lines in a screenplay. They reflected his own regrets, serving as a reminder of the opportunity he had passed up. When the screen went black, Deke turned off the television and sat in silence, the weight of his decisions looming over him like a veil. He had won the war he had been fighting, control, success, and safety, but the triumph was meaningless. Electra was gone, and with her the prospect of something genuine, something worth sacrificing everything for. In the end, Deke's struggle was not against Electra, Will, or the world. It was a war with himself, and he could never win because the cost of success was precisely what he'd been too terrified to embrace. Love, vulnerability, and the bravery to let go of control. And so he sat alone in the dark, lamenting not only Electra, but the man he could have been if he'd been brave enough to fight for her. Deke had always had a storm inside him. Not the kind that yells and destroys everything, but the quiet, gnawing storm that snakes around your chest, making every breath feel heavy. People rarely saw it. He was charming, bright, and disarmingly courteous, but a lethal current flowed behind the grin. Will knew this better than anyone. They had grown up side by side, sharing a childhood full of skinned knees and whispered secrets, but by the age of 18 Deke's storm had begun to spill over into the lives of those around him. Electra was the unwitting focus of this turmoil. She wasn't particularly attractive, but there was something about her that grabbed attention, a gentle allure, a laugh that seemed like the first rays of morning after a hard night. Deke had noticed her first. Perhaps it was because she reminded him of a purity he had never truly realized, or perhaps he simply desired something he could never entirely grasp. Whatever it was, it festered within him like an untreated sore. Will had adored Electra since the first time he met her in their small town's old library. She had been reaching for the same book as him, a worn volume of poetry, when their hands brushed. That single encounter had left a mark that neither of them could explain. Will's love was soft, protective, and quietly desperate. He understood Deke's nature intimately and worried for her even before Deke acted. The initial confrontation was subtle. Deke would emerge as Electra headed home from work, offering to carry her groceries, complimenting her laugh, and eyeing her in a way that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She tried to dismiss it, believing she had imagined his intentions, until one evening when she noticed he had been following her for blocks. That was the first time fear supplanted confusion. Will confronted Deke outside of the library one afternoon. Rain poured in sheets, leaving the sidewalks wet and shiny. "Deke," Will whispered, his voice calm yet quiet. "Take a step back. You're scaring her." Deke gave that slow, knowing smile that made everyone pause just a little too long. Are you scaring her? He repeated, as if tasting the word. Or perhaps I am showing her something real. Something you could never offer her, Will. You're dangerous, Will responded. It was not a warning. That was a statement. Deke's eyes darkened, and a shadow passed across his face. Dangerous, he repeated finally. Yes, dangerous is exactly how I am. However, this is also true for life. Maybe Electra deserves a little danger. Since that day, the tension between the three of them has risen. Every encounter became heavier, charged with electricity that made the air feel heavy. Deke began leaving modest gifts, books, flowers, letters written in rose-scented ink, and something worse unspoken. Electra attempted to ignore them, but their gestures disturbed her. They weren't romantic gestures. They were possessions, markers, a subtle insistence that she belonged to him in ways she hadn't agreed to. Meanwhile, Will became her anchor. He didn't try to confront Deke at every turn, but instead remained nearby, a silent presence ready to protect her. Nevertheless, he felt powerless. Deke's charisma was seductive, the type that made people doubt themselves, their instincts, and in some cases their own love. Electra was trapped between terror and Deke's peculiar, obvious fascination. One night a storm broke. Electra had gone to the old pier on the outskirts of town, seeking a loan, unconscious that Deke and Will were observing her from different ends. The wind whipped through her hair and tugged at her scarf, while the moon cast long shadows across the splintered wooden boards. Deke was the first to approach, his steps silent against the boards. You shouldn't have come here alone, he added quietly, almost affectionately. Electra froze. Deke, stay away, she whispered. But he moved closer, and she saw for the first time the intensity in his eyes, the way his gaze seemed to pierce through her, dissecting every idea. Will came moments later, his coat billowing in the breeze. Leave her alone, Deke. Now. Deke turned to face him, and for a brief instant, the storm within him became apparent, swirling and fierce. Or what? He stated. Will, you have always been a good boy. The safe boy. But safe does not win hearts. Danger does. And she will know it soon enough. Electra took a step back, tears welling up in her eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked Deke. Why don't you leave me alone? Deke's voice fell to a whisper, bearing the weight of years of longing, bitterness, and misery. As I see you, I see things he can't. And one day you'll thank me. Will's fists tightened, and the tension in the air grew excruciating. They stood silently, the three of them caught in an unwinnable conflict. The wind conveyed their unspoken comments, as the waves below broke against the pier, echoing the fury above. The following week everything fell apart. Deke had cornered Electra in the abandoned warehouse where he claimed to work on special projects. Will had been watching from a distance, knowing something would go wrong but too late to stop it. Deke did not raise his hand. He did not yell or threaten. But the way he stared at her, wide-eyed, terrified, and trembling, was more terrifying than any explosion. You'll never leave me, he stated. I can't let you. Electra's heart raced. Please let me go, she begged. You don't understand, Deke muttered. I've waited all my life for you. You can't leave me because I've dedicated everything to this moment. Everything. Will break the fragile silence. Deke, stop it. You are harming her. The confrontation was quick but devastating. During the pandemonium, Deke fell backward and struck his head on the edge of a metal beam. It was sudden, accidental, and final. Electra screamed as he collapsed to the floor, and Will held her back, tears blinding his vision. The paramedics had arrived too late. Deke's final words to Electra, whispered as she grasped his lifeless hand, were a bizarre mix of love and regret. I only wanted to be seen. Electra never recovered from that night. The guilt of having survived and not been able to save him lingered. Yes, she loved Will, but every quiet moment was haunted by the memory of Deke. The way his eyes had gazed, the storm within him, and the frightening intensity that had lured her in despite all odds. Will attempted to console her and reassemble the wreckage of their lives. But Electra had changed. She no longer smiled freely or walked proudly. Her every move was tinged with caution, a trepidation that had crept in. She adored Will, but a part of her would always remember the danger she had escaped, and the boy who had loved her with an intensity that was both beautiful and horrifying at the same time. Years passed and the community went on. People forgot about the storm that had passed, but Electra never did. She frequented the pier, staring at the waves and remembering the three of them, the boy who had loved safely, the boy who had loved dangerously, and herself, stuck in the middle of a story with no happy conclusion. She carried Deke in her heart like a ghost, a reminder that love can be both a refuge and a prison. And every now and then, when the wind whispered just right, she believed she heard his voice, soft and broken, muttering, "I only wanted to be seen." And in that moment the past and present met, leaving her wondering if love, even when it hurts, is worth enduring at all.